Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here. Now that my two obligatory informative videos are done for the day, it's time to talk about current events in the online fitness community. And Jeff Nippard made a very comprehensive video about the deadlift, and I thought I would give you guys my take on this. So let me put on my +5 out of weaponsmithing, work on skilling my craft a little bit, and let's talk about this. Alright guys, I want to teach you how to deadlift today. Alright guys, just kidding aside, Jeff's voice aside and kind of the cheesy music in the background aside, it was actually a good video. Jeff's one of those guys I occasionally give him a hard time, but I don't actually dislike Nippard. There are plenty of guys in this industry who are bad guys. They're worthy of our dislike. They're worthy of our contempt. I clown those guys regularly, but honestly, Jeff isn't a bad guy. He really isn't. Believe me, there are plenty of bad guys out there for us to hate. He's not on that list. I may not agree with everything he says, and I might really dislike the fact that he pushes the whole silly-ass bodybuilding gig, which I think bodybuilding is absurd. But, you know, to each their own, whatever blows your skirt up, whatever ropes your goat. And as far as the deadlift video goes, I thought it was pretty comprehensive. I thought it was very good. I think it gives you a good idea between the differences between sumo and conventional. I think he did give a lot of really good advice on setting up. On the sumo deadlift, and I think using the way that he taught you as far as foot position, everything else, different mental cues and things that you can use to improve your mechanics on it, I thought it was pretty good. And I think if someone wanted to sumo deadlift, for example, I think it would be a pretty good video for you to watch. Like if you wanted to learn how to perform it, I think he did a really good job of breaking it down effectively, fairly, teaching you how to do it. As far as anything I disagreed with or that I'd like to correct, minor caveats, yeah, there are a few. They're not like glaring problems, though, in the video. They really aren't. So I don't want people to think that I'm being just unnecessarily critical or that I thought it was a bad video, because it actually was a pretty good video. I mean, one that I'd recommend. So minor things I don't like really that he tried to say, if you're going to train for hypertrophy, do this. You're going to train for strength, do this. Jeff, there's no difference between the two. The difference in training for strength versus hypertrophy is pretty subtle. It's pretty subtle. And even then, it really only pertains to big multi-joint movements anyways, where there's a learning curve, a motor unit learning pattern that has to be learned. That's the only time you can really separate the two. You know, for the most part, and that's understood. I mean, the data is pretty overwhelming. You've seen all the studies. You've had plenty of conversations with Schoenfeld and Knuckles and all these guys. The data pretty well shows that size equals strength relative to your height until drugs come into the mix, right? The only reason we out here think there's a difference between size and strength is due to drugs, due to misconceptions about people's size, right? Misconceptions about people's size because on the internet and on video, sometimes the amount of body fat people have, or maybe the size of their biceps or whatever, gives ideas about how much muscle a person's carrying. You can't always completely compare heights of people who aren't standing side by side. So all of those things create misconceptions, but the data is pretty overwhelming, and you've seen it yourself. And you know there's no real difference. And honestly, there's benefits to training multiple rep ranges for both size and for strength. Even if one of those two is your primary goal, there's benefits to training more than one rep range. They have their place in programming. And I think most sane people, and even insane people like me, generally agree with that, right? We generally all agree on that. But what was interesting, though, is that both of your points overlap what I tell a lot of people. What should you be base building on? 5 rep sets build your base very effectively. No matter what your goals are, they're your good starting position. And notice both ends of his spectrum included 5. So just kind of throwing that out there for those who caught that. There's a reason most really, really good novice programs have you focus close to the 5 rep range. There's a reason for that. That was a minor caveat. One of the other ones that bothered me a little bit was the whole point, well, I mean, yes, there's upper body involvement, but I count it as a lower body lift. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that you can build a tremendous back. And I don't just mean your erectors off of just the deadlift. And I'm not saying that you should. I'm not saying it's the most effective. But let's be realistic here. The deadlift absolutely builds an upper body. It absolutely builds lats. It absolutely builds traps. I mean, and if we have to be honest here, when we look at the EMG data and things, the stabilization and isometrics on the deadlift are so heavily involved in some of these muscles that it's competitive. It's competitive with exercises that we think of as lat exercises. It's competitive with exercises we think of as trap exercises. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that it is actually a case of where you are having to isometrically pull your scapula together and isometrically hold the deadlift out of the bottom. And the further you have to bend over, which again makes it more effective than rack pulls for this, the further you have to bend over, the more isometric strength you're using there. And while I'm not a fan of isometrics for building muscle or strength, I'm not a big fan. I mean, the forces there involved and even the EMGs that look at it involved are undeniable. The deadlift really is a full body exercise. The deadlift really and truly is an exercise that can build your upper and lower body. That's why we kind of come back to the point, though, when we start really thinking in terms of splits. This is the problem we run into with splits, is that people need to understand, why do we split training at all? We split training not for physical reasons. We don't do it for physiological reasons. You don't have to split your training in any sort of body part manner to maximize growth, strength, any of that stuff. You don't have to. We do it for organizational purposes, to make it make sense in our mind when we're wanting to split our training up. Because when we want to start adding more volume to training, it's really hard to do the same number of big exercises every day. Like doing full body 3 times a week, particularly with the same big exercises, can become really grueling in terms of maximum recoverable volume, total fatigue, things like that, when you try to stack it together that way. So there's a reason we do start splitting things up when we want to increase volume to some extent. But, you know, again, usually ends up, if you're smart, it ends up being like a push-pull or movement pattern, or maybe an upper-lower. But the point we get to, though, is that I don't really like people classifying the deadlift and other good lifts like that as a lower body exercise or an upper body. And I know it's a minor caveat, but it is there. The other thing, he talked about anecdotally with the bicep tears. I'll tell you right now, you haven't been around that many strong guys, then, Jeff. If you've never personally seen a bicep tear, go to more big powerlifting meets. Go to more big powerlifting meets, and that's not anecdote. I have been in the iron game long enough, and I've seen enough of them happen, and I've torn a bicep myself. I have torn a bicep myself. As far as it being anecdotally linked to the supinated grip hand, the underhand grip, I don't think it's anecdote. In my N=1 experience, observing powerlifting, every single bicep tear that I've ever seen, every single person that I know who has torn a bicep, including myself, it has been the underhand grip hand. And I'm going to say, in actual meets, at powerlifting meets, I have probably seen something in the range of 6 or 7 bicep tears at actual meets. It's the underhand grip. And at least 50% of the time, it's from people not pulling the slack out of the bar. It's jerking the bar, right? It's jerking the bar the way that you described. So I appreciate the fact that you did bring up the importance of pulling the slack out of the plates. And I think it's important that we discuss, if you are going to do the mixed grip, alternating hands. Alternating hands is a good idea. Number one, it's going to put less total fatigue and accumulated fatigue on the connective tissue of the same arm, where you are going to predispose yourself to a tear. If you're alternating the grip each time, and you're pulling the slack out of the bar, which is things that you did recommend, and so I'm going to give credit there. I'm going to take credit away for saying, well, anecdotally, no, it's always the underhand grip hand. There might be a rare exception somewhere in the world, but I can tell you right now, if you were to go do a survey yourself, I promise you 19 out of 20 guys that you talk to who've torn a bicep, it was the underhand grip, right? And if you watch any of the video footage of it out there happening, there's plenty of them online, it's always the underhand grip. Like, there'd have to be something really wrong with your technique for the pronated hand to tear a bicep. And I've heard of no one ever doing it with a hook grip, for example. So I'm a big fan of the hook grip. That's how I pull these days. But back to the point, I will give credit, though, that I think that your advice to switch hands, right? Switch hands back and forth, maybe every other rep, right? Not just every other set. You can switch reps because we're going to reset the weight anyways on a deadlift if you're doing rep work. And pulling the slack out of the bar. I think that combination that you advise is probably going to bring the bicep injury rate down quite a bit. Like if everyone followed that advice right there, I would venture to say at least half of the bicep tears out there wouldn't happen. I'm not saying it would completely eliminate it, but it would reduce it dramatically. So that's a solid piece of combined advice that you put in there. But basically jerking the bar, not pulling the slack out of it, that's one of the worst things you can do on multiple levels. That is a good way to get hurt just in general and have piss poor form. So I am glad that you pointed that out, of getting the slack pulled out of the bar before you break it off the floor. And there's a lot of different techniques out there that people can use to do that. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.